Right now, you're deciding whether to keep watching this video. At least it feels like you're deciding. But what if that feeling is an illusion? What if your brain has already made the choice milliseconds ago and you're just along for the ride? What if everything you've ever done was always going to happen exactly that way? That's the free will problem. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why it's one of the hardest questions in philosophy and what's actually at stake. You'll be able to map out the three major positions on free will, understand why smart people disagree so fiercely about this problem, and figure out which view makes most sense to you and why that matters. G'day, I'm Drew, the philosopher, and today we're tackling the big one, free will. This is the question that keeps people up at night. Because if you don't have free will, what does that mean for things like responsibility, or for punishment, or for pride, or regret, or love, or meaning? Basically everything that makes you, you. So let's use the toolkit from our last few episodes to actually think this through and ask, what does the evidence suggest? What are the best arguments on each side? And can we figure out what's actually true? Let's get into it. So here's the setup. It seems like we have free will, right? You chose to watch this video. You chose what you had for breakfast. You chose your career. You chose your friends. You chose your Spotify playlist. YouTube Music playlist. It feels like you're in control. But here's the problem. Everything in the universe seems to follow the laws of cause and effect. Physics, chemistry, biology, it's all just particles obeying rules. And your brain, it's made of particles too, and it follows the rules. So when you decide to do something, that decision is just neurons firing in your brain. And those neurons fire because of prior causes, things like your genetics, your upbringing, your experiences, the chemicals in your bloodstream right now, the fact that you didn't sleep well last night, the fact that none of us slept well last night. And if we rewound the universe to 5 minutes ago and played it forward again, would anything be any different? Would the particles in your brain arrange themselves differently? Or would everything, including your choices, unfold exactly the same way? This is what we call determinism. The idea that every event, including every choice you've ever made, is the inevitable result of prior causes, like dominoes falling. And if determinism is true, then how can you be free? How can you truly choose anything if the universe is just one long chain of cause and effect, stretching all the way back to the Big Bang? Think about it like this. Imagine Harry Potter, say, walking into the Forbidden Forest in the Deathly Hallows, ready to sacrifice himself to Voldemort. He chooses to die to save his friends. But is it really a choice? Or is it just the inevitable result of his personality, which came from his genetics and how he was raised by the Dursley, or his experiences, his losing his parents, his forming deep friendships, his learning about the prophecy, and the specific arrangement of neurons in his brain at the moment, which were determined by the laws of biology and physics? If you could rewind time to that exact moment with everything exactly the same brain state, same memories, same universe, would Harry ever make a different choice? Or would he always, inevitably, walk into that forest? That's the problem, and it makes free will look impossible. So, analytic philosophers have three main responses to this problem. Let's call them hard determinism, libertarianism, not the political kind, and compatibilism. Now, hard determinism says, you're right, free will is impossible. Determinism is true, and that means that none of your choices are really free. You're a biological machine following the laws of physics. Sorry, not sorry. This sounds pretty depressing, but hard determinists, they bite the bullet. They say we need to think responsibility, punishment, and morality in light of this. Maybe we don't blame people for crimes anymore. We just quarantine the dangerous individuals and try to fix the conditions that created the harmful behavior in the first place. Hard determinists think that no one deserves praise or punishment because no one could have done otherwise. Now, libertarianism, again, not the political kind, says no. Free will is real. Determinism must be wrong somewhere, or at least incomplete. There's something about human choice that breaks that causal chain. Maybe it's consciousness. Maybe it's some quantum indeterminacy in the brain. Maybe it's something non-physical, like a soul. But whatever it is, you are the ultimate source of your actions, not just a puppet of prior causes. And this feels right to a lot of people. It matches our experience. But here's the problem. How does it work? Because if your choice isn't caused by prior events, then what is it really caused by? If it's truly random or uncaused, is that really you choosing, or is it just chaos? Think about it. If your decisions aren't caused by your beliefs, desires, personality, or experiences, if they're somehow outside the causal chain, then in what sense are they yours? A random decision isn't a free decision either. It's just a dice roll. So in libertarianism, not the political kind, just like hard determinism, there are problems too. And then there's the third option, compatibilism, which says, hold on, you're both wrong. Free will and determinism are compatible. You can have both. Wait, what? Compatibilists argue that free will doesn't mean that your choices are uncaused. It means that your choices come from you, from your desires, beliefs, and values, rather than from external force or coercion. But here's the distinction. Compatibilism acknowledges that if someone puts a gun to your head and says, choose A, you're not acting freely. You're being coerced. But if you choose A because you genuinely want A, because it aligns with your values and desires, then you are acting freely, even if those values and desires themselves were caused by prior events. Think of it this way. When Neville stands up to Harry, Ron, and Hermione in the Philosopher's Stone, trying to stop them from breaking the rules, typical Neville, that choice is caused by his personality, his experiences, his grandmother's lessons about bravery, about his desire to help Gryffindor. It's all deterministic, but it's still his choice because it flows from who he is. No one's forcing him. He's doing what he believes is right, even though it's terrifying. Compatibilists say that's enough for free will. Free will isn't about breaking the laws of physics, it just bends them a little. It's about acting in accordance with your own desires and values without external coercion. All right. So which position is right? Well, let's test them a little. So here's a case. Imagine Voldemort survived and was put on trial for all the terrible things he did. Should the Wizengamot punish him? Hard determinists say, not in the retributive sense. He couldn't have done otherwise, so he doesn't deserve punishment. But we might still need to remove him from society to protect others. Keep him in Azkaban perhaps, but without the Dementors. But punishment becomes about consequences and prevention, not moral desert. Libertarians, not the political ones, on the other hand, say yes, absolutely. He chose to commit those acts. He could have done otherwise. He's morally responsible and punishment is justified. He deserves Azkaban. Compatibilists, meanwhile, say yes, but for different reasons. Voldemort acted on his own desires and values, power, immortality, pure blood supremacy, without external coercion. For those reasons, he's responsible. We hold people accountable not because they could have violated the laws of physics, but because holding people accountable shapes future behavior, both theirs and society's. Now here's where it gets interesting. What if we found out that Voldemort had been given a potion as a child that fundamentally altered his capacity for empathy and love? Or what if splitting his soul into Horcruxes damaged his brains in ways so that it destroyed his moral reasoning? Suddenly, even those advocating hardline retribution pause. Because now it feels like he wasn't acting freely. His choices were compromised by something outside of his control. But wait, Voldemort chose to make those Horcruxes. And what about his upbringing? He was conceived under a love potion, raised in miserable orphanage, never knew love or stability. If Horcruxes remove responsibility, what about a loveless childhood? What about being born unable to feel love because of the circumstances of his conception? Where do you draw the line? Hard determinists say you don't. There is no line. It's all prior causes all the way down. The Horcruxes, the orphanage, the love potion, they're all just more obvious parts of the causal chain. Libertarians say there's something special about normal human agency that Horcruxes disrupt. When your soul is intact and your brain is functioning properly, you are genuinely in control in a way that transcends mere causation. Voldemort had that capacity once before he chose to destroy it. While compatibilists might say the line is about whether the person was acting on their own stable desires and values, or whether something, like Horcruxes or the Imperious Curse, disrupted their normal decision-making processes. Voldemort's values were twisted, but they were his values. He acted on them consistently, without external coercion. And that, for compatibilists, is enough for responsibility. So, I think I might be able to guess what you may be thinking at this point. Oh, this is all very interesting, but it feels like I'm making choices right now. I'm choosing to keep watching or clicking away, and that feeling has to count for something. And you're right, it does feel that way. But here's the thing, feelings aren't always a reliable guide to truth. It also feels sometimes like the sun revolves around the earth. It also feels like solid objects are actually solid, not mostly empty space. Our intuitions are often wrong about how the world really works. The question isn't whether free will feels real. The question is whether that feeling tracks something metaphysically true about the universe, or whether it's just a useful illusion that your brain creates. Hard determinists say it's an illusion. A helpful one, maybe. It motivates you to be deliberate and make good choices, but it's still an illusion. Libertarians say, no, the feeling tracks something real. You are genuinely the author of your own actions in a deep metaphysical sense. And the compatibilists say, the feeling's real enough. You're free in the sense that matters, free from coercion, free to act on your values. Whether the underlying physics is deterministic is a little beside the point for them. Compatibilists really are the good enough workers of the philosophical world, aren't they? So you might be wondering, hey Drew, you're a philosopher. Where do you land on all of this? Well, here's the thing. Those are all analytic approaches, and I'm a continental philosopher. And from my tradition, we think that all three of these positions are making the same fundamental mistake. They're all operating within a framework, a set of metaphysical assumptions about how the world works, that I think is deeply flawed from the start. And to give you a quick preview of what that is, it's like they're splitting the world into subjects and objects, mind and matter, free agents versus determined mechanisms. It's what philosophers call Cartesian, after René Descartes, the intellectual father of that kind of approach. And continental philosophers think that Descartes got a whole lot of things wrong, that kind of set certain philosophies on a misleading path. Continental philosophers, especially those working in what we call the phenomenological and Heideggerian traditions, start from a completely different place. We think that you can't understand human action by treating people as objects in a causal chain or as magical agents outside the laws of nature. We're embodied beings already embedded into a world of meaning, social practices, and lived experience. The question isn't, are we free or determined? It's that the question itself rests on a misunderstanding of what we are and what the universe is like. Now, I know that sounds like a philosopher saying, everybody's wrong and starting over, which is a classic philosopher move, and you'd be right. We do that a lot. But here's the important point I'm trying to get at. The three positions we've just covered, hard determinism, libertarianism, not the political kind, and compatibilism, are a great place to start. They're rigorous, they're well developed, and they'll teach you how to think carefully about issues like agency, responsibility, and causation. And for a lot of philosophers working in the analytic tradition, they represent the main terrain of the debate. But there are actually dozens of other compelling approaches to free will that come from completely different philosophical traditions. Things like phenomenology, Heideggerian thought, Buddhist philosophy, Chinese philosophical traditions, and more. Each of these approaches challenges the underlying metaphysics in different ways and comes to very different conclusions. And we'll get into some of that later in this series. In fact, we've got a whole video coming up on metaphysics, what exists, what reality is actually like, and you'll see why these deeper questions matter so much. But for now, the three positions that we've covered give you the tools to understand one of the most influential debates in Western philosophy. So even though I think everyone in this debate is operating from the wrong starting point, that doesn't mean it's not worth understanding. You need to know the territory before you can see why some of us think that the map itself is drawn the wrong way. And who knows, maybe after working through these positions, you'll land somewhere I haven't. But hey, that's philosophy. All right, so here's your challenge for this week. Let's call it the responsibility test. Think about three big decisions you made recently. Could be big, could be small. And for each one, ask yourself these questions. Could I have done otherwise? If you rewound time with everything exactly the same, would you have made a different choice? And did I act on my own desires and values? Or was I coerced, manipulated, acting under unusual circumstances like extreme stress or intoxication? Finally, do I feel responsible for this choice? And does that feeling of responsibility make sense given answers 1 and 2? Now here's the twist. Does it matter whether you could have done otherwise as long as you are acting in accordance with your own values without coercion? So try this 3 times. See if your intuitions about free will might shift, and be honest with yourself. If you start thinking everything is determined, does that actually change the way you feel about your choices? Or does something still feel importantly yours about them? Would it change how you act? or what you would do in the future. So here's what I want to leave you with. We just wrestled with one of the hardest questions in philosophy. And notice what we did. We used the toolkit from the last few episodes. We identified the arguments. We tested them against real cases. We looked for the strongest objections. And we still don't have a perfect answer. That's philosophy. And here's the question we're going to look at in the next episode. If we're not even sure that we have free will, how can we be sure that we know anything at all? How do we know that the world is real, for example? How do we know that we're not in a simulation or dreaming or being deceived by an evil demon? That's what we'll be tackling next. What can we actually know? It's called epistemology, the study of knowledge. And we'll also look at why radical skepticism in philosophy is both annoying and important. So let me know in the comments where you land on free will. Are you a hard determinist, a libertarian, or a compatibilist? Or do you have a completely different approach entirely? And why? Let's discuss it. And if you're enjoying the series, please consider liking and subscribing. We're just getting started, and the questions will only get weirder from here. So be wise, be kind, and see you next time.